Isn't that something? If if I'm without the back office, it seems like I'm out of control. Well, thanks. Hopefully you have some volume now. And I want you to know something. In the past, I thought I had to turn off the mute because when you put on the little ticker tape, it's supposed to bounce right over. And I obviously blew that, but you're kind of used to me blowing it. So, uh, whatever. But Miss Sophia and I think I saw Mimi J2 jump in. Thanks for modding today, and sure appreciate you guys. Miss Sophia, I put up a special thanks for reminding us all that in the Daybell trial, it's had a move in the date to June 9 to give Pryor a little more time to look over some things. Patty Cook, yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about Chauvin for a minute, and I wanted to get your impressions on the trial thus far. So I'd really like you to weigh in about what you're seeing. We still are obviously on the prosecution side of the house. So we're getting a very one-sided examination of what the state is putting up. We're seeing the defense come forward with some interesting arguments. I go back to my comments from last week, having been in those situations where I've struggled, even with someone who's handcuffed. It can really be a battle. The trouble that I'm having in this darn case is that for about 2 minutes and 53 seconds, shortly after the officers announce that they don't feel a pulse on Mr. Floyd, they continue to leave him proned out and continue to try to get control of the scene there. And I think that's going to be the real challenge that they have to somehow get over from the defense standpoint. But we'll jump in and talk about that in a second here. I want to just say hello to a few people. So please, again, Vanessa Gutierrez, nice. Glad. I hope you can hear me now. Matt Bond, thanks. You all are weighing in that the dummy behind the mic forgot to take the mute button off, but hopefully we're in business now. So thanks a lot. Cheated No More, how you doing? Crystal AK, I don't know how to say that, BGSS Crystal, though. Thanks, and welcome, Shannon. The defense, Patty Cook, I think your comment's interesting. I'd like to know more if you could type it in. She says the defense is good. If I was on a jury, I don't see Chauvin guilty. It's been really interesting to watch the defense. We're going to talk a little more about the prosecution and the defense as we go on today. But again, I think the real challenge is going to be getting over that hump of that 2 minutes and 53 seconds. And should there have been efforts to roll Mr. Floyd over, to sit him up, other kinds of things once the fighting stopped. Shyla, hello from Ireland. Nice to see you. Good evening. Maui Swift, nice to see you. Thank you. And VP, thanks. Yeah, agreeing with me. That's the problem. Once he had no pulse, what do you do? This is just such an emotional trial. I mean, the man died, whether he died because of narcotics that were ingested or physical ailments or force that went overboard. A human being died, and that's a horrible situation. How have you felt about the city coming forward and testifying against Chauvin? I found it really interesting. Number one, I'm still really troubled by two things. One is I'm troubled by the fact that the city settled for $27 million during jury selection. That still really troubles me. I am having a hard time getting over that. City, in essence, saying we were wrong. And if the city was wrong, that's one thing. But now that means that also the defense was wrong, and maybe they are. I don't know, but that troubled me. The other thing that troubled me is that they immediately terminated Chauvin, and they own the responsibility for Officer Chauvin's conduct as the overreaching city. I just think they threw him out with the morning wash a little soon, and that was troubling to me. That the agency should be able to still rely on their organization. Now, on the flip side, it's really troubling to me that Mr. Floyd died, and that with 4 officers, somebody wasn't in a position to say, hey, we need to turn him over. And that's going to be the real challenge. And it boils down to one of 2 things. Did his actions knowingly cause the death of Mr. Floyd? Or at the lesser degree, was he negligent and should have known that it was going to? And I think that's the real challenge that everybody's going to have. Let's see. Really glad that the cities are, let's see, who said, AAG, and I don't know, is that an assistant attorney general, or what does AAG mean? But really glad that the cities are telling the truth because that knee at least helped Floyd's death. So that's interesting. I don't know if that's actually true. If it helped. Again, you go back to the probable cause statement from last week that we reviewed. They clearly said about or on the neck. There's no question that the concern about positional asphyxiation, him laying flat for such a long time, would have been a dangerous thing. There's no question there. There's no question that in an arrest where more force is required, that the knee in between the shoulder blades is something that happens. And again, I'm not defending one side or the other. I'm trying to look at this as if I were a juror, and hope you're doing the same. But let's talk about a couple of things, and then maybe look at some messages as we go through this. So today we saw more testimony from Sergeant Jody Steiger from Los Angeles Police Department, who without question made it very clear that he believes that deadly force was used during the arrest of George Floyd. Now, Steiger, if you remember today, spoke about how, in his opinion, looking at the video and hearing the testimony, and frankly, folks, I have to agree with this, that Floyd's resistance was reducing. I mean, once he was out of the car and on the ground, they were considering doing a hog tying maneuver, and then they chose not to. Now, the defense is claiming that that's proof that they were de-escalating, but it's clear that Floyd was fighting less. And then the sergeant went on to say, and not only was his resistance decreasing, but his health was deteriorating. Now, I don't know how he makes that decision as a police officer and not a medical professional, but in his opinion, he felt like things were getting difficult then. If you watched, it was about this time when the defense did their cross-examination, and I don't know how you feel about Eric Nelson, but I think he's doing a pretty darn good job so far of trying to help protect Chauvin's rights through the trial process. Nelson plays a body cam video and audio where he says to the sergeant, what did you hear Floyd say? And the sergeant responds he couldn't understand it. The defense then says, let me tell you what he said. He said, quote, Floyd is saying, quote, I ate too many drugs, close quote. Sergeant Steiger says he couldn't make out that was what Floyd said. And frankly, if you listen to it, you can kind of assume that that's what's said. It kind of sounds and fits that way, but it's not real clear to me. Maybe it is to you. But what we do know is that Floyd ingested medicines, and that's toxicology has shown that. In fact, there was further testimony today about that. Steiger concludes his testimony again by saying that he didn't feel like Floyd posed a threat to the officers at the point that things slow down and eventually come to a close. And I would have to agree that last 2 minutes, 2.5, 2:53, Floyd certainly isn't fighting. He's in the process of dying, which is just a horrible thing to think about. I don't think anybody disputes that this was horrible. This man died. The question is, again, a legal question. Did Chauvin knowingly cause the death of Floyd, or did he negligently cause the death of Floyd? And that's going to boil down to how was he trained and what was his thought process. And they're going to ask the jury, and each of us are going to have this opportunity to get into the mind of Officer Chauvin and decide, was he doing this purposely or negligently, or did he really think he was getting control of the scene while he waited for additional backup and for medical people to come? That's really what this is boiling down to, and it's tough. What we saw last week was incredibly emotional testimony from the witnesses, the group that was assembled outside, from the citizen videographers, and it was gut-wrenching testimony if you watched that. And let me just shout out a couple of folks. Matt Bond, thank you so much. Matt says, after a break and looking closer, they found, he said, I ain't used no drugs. Defense couldn't come back on it. So that's interesting, Matt. I'd love if you would email me that content because I didn't hear that, and but I really appreciate that kind donation and your support. I want to also bring up Darlene Jordahl's statement. I think after watching each day, the forensics show the meth in his system, but also he was taking opioid addiction prescriptions. The EMTs state that he was dead when they arrived. And yeah, isn't that tragic to watch them loading him onto that filled gurney? It is just a sad thing. But again, we got to go back. And I think Patty Cook, you're hitting the nail on the head. We got to go back and look at it, not from the emotional standpoint of this man losing his life, but did Chauvin intend for him to lose his life, either negligently or purposely? And we can all accept the fact, because he wasn't charged, that it wasn't a premeditated murder. So it boils down to those things. And I don't know if you don't watch Crime Talk, boy, make sure you dial into Scott's channel and subscribe. Actually, just Scott and I were on today doing a show that will play on his channel in a couple of days with me and one of the victims from the Zion Society. But I've been watching Scott's show every single night faithfully just to get his legal perspective. And it's fun because I come from a kind of a prosecution background, as you know, having worked in the Attorney General's office. And so we get to spar a little bit between the defense attorney's point of view and a prosecution position based on a police officer's point of view. But anyway, let's get back to business. So it was a really gut-wrenching week last week as we listened to those civilians talk about what they observed. This week, what we're seeing is their allegations of misconduct being backed up by police officers and command staff from the Minneapolis Police Department. And while no one can deny that the officers left Floyd on the ground for time after they couldn't feel a pulse, again, it goes back to what was his intent. Now, Sergeant Steiger, in his discussion today, referred to this idea of personal asphyxiation or positional asphyxiation. And he referenced the fact that this has been taught to law enforcement, and I remember it very well. It's been taught as long as 25 years ago. And I thought you might be interested just to see some of the statements about positional asphyxiation. So I'm gonna pull this up, and we're gonna just talk through a couple of these things, and just share with you what positional asphyxiation means in the core sense. So let's see if I can zoom in a little bit here. Um, well, I'm hitting buttons all over the place, and none of them are the right ones. So let's go right here and do it this way. First, positional asphyxiation. This is from the U.S. Department of Justice, and it is based on a document from June of 1995. But what I want to focus on here is positional asphyxiation is the sudden in custody death phenomenon, and it can occur for a number of reasons, and those reasons are cocaine induced frenzy behavior or drug induced, which it sounds like there were certainly drugs in Mr. Floyd's system. Violent struggle extreme enough to require officers to employ a restraint device. So we know that a restraint device was employed. And then sudden death from this positional asphyxiation is unresponsiveness immediately after a struggle. And the philosophy, quite frankly, is that keep in mind that when a person is lying on their stomach and has trouble breathing, the remedy is pretty simple. It's to roll them onto their side and try to get them to sit up. And that's going to be a real challenge that they're going to have to overcome, is the reason why they couldn't do that. This is going to be something that I think we're going to hear over and again, and it may be beneficial for you just to have seen that. And you can look up that document online. Department of Justice, positional asphyxiation. Now, the prosecution seemed to minimize the idea that there was threat coming from the crowd, and we've listened to that. We've seen pictures. In fact, one other picture that I wanted to show you here, I'll just bring up real quickly, is this picture of the crowd. Let's see. Which is a pretty benign looking group. The thing that I think's interesting is the prosecution keeps referring to this photograph and saying, look, they're standing on the sidewalk. They're not a threat to the officers. What I think is interesting is I don't see a lot of attention going to what the dispatcher said and what the radio traffic was, because even the dispatchers were notifying backup officers that the scene outside of Cup Foods was escalating, and that was a concern for dispatchers as well. So this is where it's going to really boil down to again. I think is was their deadly force employed, and was it reasonable or outside of reason? And the statute is that force which the actor uses with the purpose of causing, or which the actor should reasonably know creates a substantial risk of causing death or great bodily harm. That's the real issue that I think is going to have to be answered in order for this to be a conviction. And they very well may get that. I don't know. Again, our emotion is just so offended by it. Now, the defense is building a case around the belief that Chauvin acted reasonably based on what he perceived at the time. And so as we, in the next couple of days, I think we're going to get all the pathology. And this is going to be really important because we're going to hear all about the medical side of this and what really was the cause of death from a medical perspective. Today, the last witness before they closed out today was Susan Neith, who's a forensic chemist for NMS Labs in Pennsylvania. And I had to look up the labs, but it's a lab with about 300 employees that tests a bucket load of drugs for law enforcement, hospitals, medical examiners to determine what's inside the medications. Now, Neith says that she received 3 partial pills to test that were taken from the vehicle. And that, again, she remarked that they each were partial, so broken into parts. And in those, methamphetamine and fentanyl levels were found in all three pills. She says, quote, "In my personal experience, we generally see levels just under 1% and sometimes slightly higher, close quote, basically indicating that in her opinion, those pills were consistent with other pills of methamphetamine and fentanyl that she sees. Although she says she generally sees a little higher level of fentanyl than she saw in those particular pills. Um, so anyway, that's what we know about that at this point. And I want to talk about what I think the defense is going to try to build their case around for just a second. And again, I'm just a retired cop. Thankfully, I had the opportunity almost all of my career to work for either county attorneys, district attorneys, or the attorney general, where, as many of you know, I retired as a chief in the attorney general's office. But here's what I believe the defense is. The defense is going to build their case around the belief that Chauvin was acting reasonably based on whatever was in his mind. And that's going to be the key is, can we get inside his mind and decide whether he felt threatened and needed to do this in order to maintain control of the scene, or if we believe the prosecution that he was acting knowing that he could cause the death of Mr. Floyd, or was just so reckless that just his absolute negligence caused the death of Mr. Floyd. Now, the defense is going to lean on a doctrine called objectionably reasonable. And it stems from a Supreme Court case called Graham versus Connor in 1989-ish, 1990. Anyway, which establishes that an officer's actions must be judged against what a reasonable police officer would do when facing the same scene. I think this is why we're seeing training officers, the chief of police, other people come in to say what they believe was reasonable and what they, in their opinion, believe should have happened. And again, keep in mind, these are all officers except for the LAPD officer. These are all officers representing the department that just paid $27 million accepting responsibility for this thing. And I'm not casting any kind of judgment other than to just kind of remind us of that. But is it what a reasonable officer would have done? Now, as you continue to watch this case and weigh the evidence, I just want to encourage you to look really closely at the evidence as it pertains to Chauvin's action. I think the case is going to boil down to whether he was following departmental policy and his mindset was that he had to do those things, or if it was criminal. Regardless, the defense is going to have a really difficult hurdle to get over that 2 minutes and 53 seconds after Floyd's pulse was no longer being registered by one of the officers. I think that's a real challenge. Let's just take a minute and read some comments and see if there are any questions in here. And again, thanks for jumping on a Wednesday afternoon. Let's see. Holly says, kind of weird to see Mike without my nightclub setting. Yeah, but you notice I put a little red light on behind me. I should have put one that kind of flashed like an old blue and red light on top or something. Let's see here. Music Genius #1 says they already suspected drugs. Yeah, we've known that along the way, and the protocol. So at least it's negligence. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be really interesting, isn't it? Again, please, folks, put yourself in the position of a juror as you go through this, and try to not let the emotion of this horrible event get in the way of what the law is going to require in order to either convict or release him from responsibility in this thing. let's see. KEG talks about going into the ambulance and the fact that he was lifeless, and it was horrible. I have to agree with you. The facts, reasonable doubt. That's going to be really what this boils down to, isn't it? Is what they can prove. Morris 17 says neglect all day, protocol to the side position, no pulse, do CPR. Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a real challenge. They've got to answer why that 2 minutes and 53 seconds passed, and what's going on. So let's see. I'll have to agree with Pack Rat. Where are all the thumbs up? Thanks a lot. And maybe the thumbs down are because I couldn't figure out how to get my microphone off mute. Who knows? So let's see. Bobby Redensek says, what bothers me even more is the department made a judgment without a complete investigation done, not only that they didn't give their own officer the time of day. That's interesting, Bobby. I mean, that's part of the thing that troubles me, although I do think that they did a pretty thorough initial investigation, but it did seem like it was pretty quick here. This has been painful for law enforcement because this isn't how most cops act, and yet it becomes the standard that people believe is the way that many cops act. And I just want to stand for those that I've had the privilege of working with over a career, that this is not normal behavior. And if it ends up that it was a horrible mistake, holy cow, could you imagine living with a horrible mistake like this? If it ends up that it was criminal in nature, then I hope that the criminal justice system follows through as it should. We'll come back and visit this in a second if you'd like, but I wanted to also take advantage of having you on to remind you of I'm going to pull this up on my screen here, that Wednesdays is the day that we release new podcasts. And today I released I think, a really special podcast. I hope you'll go to your favorite podcast platform and download it. But we released on Monday episode 6 of Mapping Evil, and please go to Mapping Evil, and you can just go to profilingevil.com if you're having a hard time finding any of this stuff. And at profilingevil.com, and shamelessly, you can always order my book Deceived, but you can go right to the Mapping Evil podcast banner and click to subscribe. It'll take you to the Mapping Evil website. And the reason I want you to consider going there is because on the Mapping Evil website, you can go in and you can register, subscribe, but you can go in and look at each individual segment. This one is on the landscape of the predator. And there you're going to get a bunch of additional content that you can follow through with. It includes this case this week. We're talking about a serial killer in Australia named Mr. Cruel. I mean, aren't those the coolest names they come up with over there? We come up with, the clown and other kinds of things, but Mr. Cruel. And you can look at my investigation into Mr. Cruel. In there is a story map that will walk you through all of the events with Mr. Cruel. You can look at other kinds of content in there. You get my thoughts on how they could be using mapping to capture Mr. Cruel, etc. But that's a place where you can go and start to get information on the case. Or you can go, as I was saying earlier, to profilingevil.com and go to the story maps, and you can click on the ever-growing story map that I have for the Mapping Evil series, and that one is called The Root of All Evil. And in there, you can go in and explore uh, the story map and look at each case individually that's talked about in each of the episodes. This one is landscape. And here's what I wanted to direct you to is that today on our regular Wednesday podcast release, we released a podcast of an interview that I conducted with a serial rapist in the prison system. He's still there. He'll die in prison. It's a case that I worked on. I actually arrested the guy even years before uh, he committed these sexual assaults. In fact, you'll hear him talk about me putting a gun in his face, but this interview I conducted just a couple of weeks ago, and wanted to share with you his victim selection process and how he went about committing his crimes. When you go into that, you're going to be able to, and I want to go out now and show you one other thing. You're going to be able to go in and also link to another story map, either through Profiling Evil or through that Root of All Evil story map. But you're going to be able to go in and get a brand new story map that I'm releasing now. Hasn't been released yet. And it is on sexual predator typology. So for those of you who heard my interview with Dr. Johnson on Friday night, a forensic psychologist talking about the power reassurance rapist, we explored that. It's in this predator story map, and you can go through and start to learn more about each of the different predator typologies. The first one will include the conversation with Scott Johnson about the power reassurance predator. And you can get it by either linking from here or going just to Profiling Evil. But here I've also included some videos of the offender talking.
So let's go back
and sharing the way that he selected victims, the kinds of homes he selected. And then there's also a link where you can go and get the podcast of about 35 minutes of my interview with this offender in the prison and hear him talk about the way he conducted those assaults, how he got away with it for so long, and all of that. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope you'll take advantage of that. And I just wanted to share that with you. Again, just go to profilingevil.com and go to the story maps tab, and you'll be able to see all of the story maps we have. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, I'd invite you to subscribe so you get updates when I release this kind of information. But just keep in mind, that's a great place for you to go back and look at some of the cases that we've covered on Profiling Evil. So Rufus Lloyd wants to know who the predator is exactly. You can go in there. His last name is Nelson. He was a serial predator who had, he thinks 75 victims. We think 85-ish victims in the United States before he was arrested. And it was great to get him off of the street. But I think you'll find what he has to say to be somewhat interesting and compelling. And again, folks, this isn't about like shaking people up. This is about empowering you with ways in which you can minimize your own possibility of minimize your own risk levels. So, well, let me take a minute and look at some of your comments, and we'll see if there's some questions that I can answer. Cheated No More says, thanks. It's great to hear directly from the predators. You know, that was my whole theory in looking at these kinds of cases during my career. In fact, I took this predator, put him in the state airplane, and flew him to other locations throughout the United States to talk to police investigators about the way in which he would select victims and locations. I'm going to talk in the coming weeks about a killer who murdered some people and took him in the plane and flew him to other locations to talk to law enforcement. Sometimes audiences big as 1,000 police officers, and to be able to learn from the expert is really pretty darn amazing. And I can't tell you how many pieces of prison lasagna I ate over the years as I interviewed these offenders in the prison system. But it's where I really learned a lot about their thought processes and about the way in which they conducted their crime. Terrible predators, from people like this guy who was a sexual predator all the way through to Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. It's I guess I don't know if I should be honored that I interviewed all those whacked out people, but we have been able to use that to train police officers over the years. Gayla Dennison was a police officer for 30 years, and I agree. People make complaints up every day to get even with you for even things like a small ticket. Yeah, and Gayla, I would suggest probably that you were just as horrified by what happened in Minneapolis as I and many other police officers were. It was not representative of what police do day in and day out. Again, though, folks, was it on a planned event or intended? Was it negligent, or was it just an officer with tunnel vision doing what he'd been trained to do? That's going to be what will really be interesting to see shake out when it's done. Let's see. Well, unless you have some questions for me, I'm going to give you the rest of your day back, and I'm going to watch for just a moment to see if any particular questions pop up. I want to remind you that if you're interested, our channel memberships are a great way to get information sometimes ahead of others, and it's certainly a wonderful way to support me in moving this channel forward. Some people get frustrated when I ask, but bottom line is it costs money to do this. And this is not a career for me. This is something I try to do on the side and try to cover the expenses that are involved in that. Also, for any of you who might purchase my book, Deceived, I want you to know something I haven't been sharing, but frankly have received some counsel that I should share, is that Deceived is I'm putting the majority of the proceeds toward child justice issues, the Children's Justice Center, to help victims of crime and other things. Again, I've been really blessed with a retirement, and I still have a full-time job. I wrote the book because those wonderful, amazing victims asked me to write it. And I want the proceeds to go where they can continue to help people like them, so they can get above that. So if you haven't purchased it and you're interested, please consider doing that. And again, if you're not a member of Profiling Evil, would you please hit the subscribe button and join up with us? And then let me just see. It looks like there might be a couple of questions here. So let's see. Question: will the jury hear about the 18 times that excessive force claims were against Chauvin? You know, I think the judge already ruled that he needs to be tried on this event, because there's also a flip side. People wanted to make sure that George Floyd's history was brought into this, and his previous drug use or his addictions. So the answer is no, they're not going to hear about that in the trial. It's obvious when you look on any of the sites or look into him that there were, and it may be that you're correct, the 18 allegations. I think he was actually disciplined in 2 of those 18 cases. He's also got some trouble with the IRS right now. His wife left him. I mean, there was a lot of stuff collapsing around this police officer, but the court rightly said, not only are we not going to talk about George Floyd's criminal history and past, we're not going to talk about Officer Chauvin's past. And whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but I hope that answers your question. Let's see. Joe Clausen says, off topic. Do you know if Warren Jeffs is still controlling the FLDS from prison? I actually drove through Colorado City and Short Creek and just about 2 weeks ago. I still know many of the people down there, having investigated that group for so many years. And the word on the street is that, yes, he still is doing things and he's getting wackier than ever, but there's still a contingent that are staying true to their belief systems down there. And there is a greater visual image as you drive through town that people that are not in that mindset are moving in and buying up properties and trying to turn that area around. So that's good news to know. Let's see. Morris 17 says, but George is not on trial here. Great point, but don't forget it's about George is on trial when the defense stands up, whether you like it or not, because they're going to use his behavior against him. So this judge saying that stuff can't be used, just like Chauvin stuff can't be used, is the decision he's making. I'll let you decide whether it's right or wrong, but I wanted Morris 17 to answer that, just to let you know. He will be on trial as soon as the defense starts. Now he has nothing to lose by what's going to happen, obviously. I mean, he's already lost everything, but let's see. One of the questions is the officers could have resorted to Narcan. Again, we're not seeing the officers do anything life-saving measure-wise. So the question is, were they even aware that that had happened? The one that should have been aware is probably Chauvin, who would be on his upper body and may have felt his chest rising and falling. The guys further down may never have been in a position to feel, other than they all heard the declaration, I would suspect, that there was no pulse. But again, I don't know that that's true. So let's see. Will the officer testify? It's going to be wait and see, isn't it? That will be really interesting. Let's see here. To answer this question, Music Genius #1, I think it already has changed policing. What we've seen is a dramatic change across the United States since last year, with police departments saying no longer can you do neck restraints. So it absolutely has changed policing. We also are seeing police officers leave the job because they're not getting the support from their administrations and from the public that they used to get. And that really frightens me, because I think we're going to see a declination in officers, which already were, an average across the country of about 10% below staffing levels. We're going to see that increase. And that means you're going to have a longer wait when you call for a police officer. Now, I may be wrong on that, but that's my personal opinion. Let's see. And Michelle Modis, who can disagree with you that no one should be killed because they are claustrophobic or scared? Those are real emotions and real issues, and this is just a terribly tough case. It's again just such a tough no-win case. Mimi J2, thank you so much. I try to get on periodically and do some lives, just because you guys are also good to me. Thanks for your support. Thanks for helping us move Profiling Evil along. Please go out and consider going to your favorite podcast platform and getting Profiling Evil and Mapping Evil with Mike King. Mapping Evil is now number I think, number 8 in the country of Australia, which is really exciting. I'd love to see the numbers in the U.S. go up. But again, please help us. We're nearing the 60,000 mark of subscribers here. So any of you who are willing to subscribe, we'd love to have you join in. And thank you so much. Let's see. I'll just do one more check before I sign off. Sharon Long, this death could have been prevented, and that's the shame in it. Absolutely. It could potentially have been prevented. And I'm not prepared to say it could have been. If they would have gotten him medical attention more quickly, if it was the positional asphyxiation that caused his death, then it could have been prevented. If it was the medications that he had ingested, the drugs, and those caused a failure, and that's what's going to be so interesting about the pathology. And frankly, I don't think it's going to say that that's the case. Otherwise, the prosecution wouldn't be bringing the pathologists on. Then the question is, could it have been prevented? And I just don't know the answer. And that's where I keep coming back to, folks, is please don't make a decision right now. Keep looking at the evidence as it unfolds and try to think of it as if you were an impartial jurist trying to make a decision at the end of the day. Because either way, you might get a little bit frustrated making a decision up front. Because again, you've heard me say it before, but when we go out and make a decision before we have all the facts, then, like the famous Sir Arthur Conan Doyle said, Sherlock Holmes, that we spend indispensably all of our time twisting facts to meet the theory that we have, rather than allowing the facts to unfold and develop a theory based on fact. So with that, I'm going to leave you all and wish you a great evening. And thank you again for your support. So from all of us at Profiling Evil, thanks a lot.